and then went on, a couple of other assignments. And then, of course, Saddam Hussein was captured in December of 2003. CIA asked the FBI to take the lead, and then shortly after, the FBI identified me or selected me to lead the interrogation of Saddam Hussein.
White horses, your mom's cookies, and jujitsu, all on this episode of the Assyrian podcast. Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 197. This is Steve, and I'm excited to introduce you to George Piro. George Piro was born in Lebanon and immigrated to the United States in the 1970s. After finishing high school, he enlisted in the Air Force and eventually joined the FBI. Now, we've interviewed a lot of people on the Assyrian podcast, but we've never sat down with someone who interrogated the former president of a country. But not just any country, the Assyrian homeland of Iraq. Of all the people in the United States government, George Piro, an Assyrian, was chosen to spend 7 months with Saddam Hussein after he was captured. In typical Assyrian podcast fashion, we'll explore George's upbringing, his life, his family, and then we'll talk a lot about what he talked to Saddam Hussein about and what that experience was like and what he's learned. And then we'll find out what he's up to these days, which includes writing a book about interrogating the former president of Iraq. So I'm excited to bring this episode to you. And with that being said, here is George Piro. Thank you so much, George, for coming on to the Assyrian podcast.
Thank you. I'm actually very excited to be part of it.
It's funny because right now when I just met you, I feel like I know you so well. Well, we did both grow up in Turlock, but also I watched like hours of your videos and have been reading about you. So it's such a honor and pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I wanted to begin with actually you moved to the United States from Lebanon when you were 12 years old.
Yes. We were fortunate enough to immigrate to the United States in July of 1979. So my family and I were able to flee Lebanon. And fortunately, my uncle was the Monsignor of the Assyrian Church here in Turlock. So he had become a U.S. citizen and as a result was able to sponsor us. And we immigrated legally at that time.
Can you share, because I wasn't able to learn a lot about this, but what was Lebanon like?
So prior to the war, Lebanon was one of the most beautiful countries in the Middle East. It's considered, the Paris of the Middle East, and it was an incredible tourist destination. Tourism was its biggest industry. Unfortunately, in the mid-'70s, the Civil War broke out, and then conditions deteriorated very, very quickly. It was a civil war that was divided among religious lines, and as the Civil War continued, the living conditions, the environment became more and more difficult.
Do you have fond memories of growing up there?
I do. I do have very clear recollection of growing up in Lebanon, both the prior to the war and, unfortunately during the war. I remember, some of the difficult periods during the war where we would have to hide in the bomb shelters and experiencing that kind of a war zone, for lack of a better term. So I have a clear recollection of that, and the difficulties and challenges that we faced, everything from no electricity to sniper fire to bombings, living under those kinds of conditions.
And did you have like an Assyrian community in Lebanon that you were a part of?
Oh, absolutely. Very, very similar to Turlock. So we lived in an Assyrian neighborhood where we had our church, and as far as I can recall, almost everybody that lived in that neighborhood were Assyrian.
This is a first for me, interviewing an FBI agent. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And one of my goals is to get you to say something like, I'm not allowed to share that, So
I'm sure that's going to happen.
Okay, cool. Good. So what's really fun for me is you came here at 12 and like you just did well. Like you were able to go into, I know for your education, you went and got your bachelor's in criminal
justice.
Criminal justice, yes. And then you became a police officer.
Yes, here in the Central Valley for nearly 10 years before having the opportunity to join the FBI.
And when you came to Turlock, what was it like growing up here for you?
Well, at first it was very, very different than Beirut, Lebanon. We loved Lebanon, loved growing up in Lebanon. In spite of the civil war, we still, my brother, sister, and I didn't really want to leave Lebanon. And then, of course, immigrating to the United States, I remember we landed in San Francisco, and then we made that long journey or drive from San Francisco to Turlock. And so this is 1979. Turlock wasn't as developed as it is today,
Right.
and then the route from San Francisco to Turlock isn't what it is today. So as we were coming here, we're seeing cows and all kinds of different things. It was very rural at the time, so we were wondering where we were moving to. And of course, what made it very difficult was when we immigrated here, we couldn't speak a word of English, not a word. So there was a lot of adjustment.
Yeah.
To the move. So when we moved here in July of '79, it was during the Iran hostage time frame, which was a really difficult time to be in the United States and to be from the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
As you can imagine, for most, they don't really know the difference between Iran and the other countries, and the difference between Farsi and Arabic and all of that. They kind of culminate that area into one group, and so there was a lot of resentment at that time for anyone from that region or that part of the world. So moving here in '79 was extremely difficult. I tell folks that was probably as bad as during the time of 9/11 and the
Mm-hmm.
resentment toward that region and to folks from the Middle East. So we moved here in August '79, and in California school starts. So we were immediately thrown into school. At the time, there was no English as a second language. So it was one of those where you were just thrown right into the mix with everyone else and forced to very quickly adapt. So we naturalized when I was 17, and then I enlisted in the Air Force on my 18th birthday.
That's amazing.
And then served, and then became a police officer in Ceres, California here. And then when I got promoted to detective, I went back to school and pursued my bachelor's because I always aspired to join the FBI. But you can't join the FBI without a minimum of a bachelor's degree. So I went to school at night and on weekends while I was a detective in Ceres, and was fortunate to acquire my bachelor's in 4 years. I was going full-time and working full-time.
That's spectacular. That's hard work and dedication.
Yes.
How many languages do you speak, and when did you learn Arabic?
So I learned Arabic, of course, immediately in Lebanon. So at home we spoke Assyrian, of course. To this day, we still continue to speak Assyrian. It's we grew up with the understanding and appreciating the importance of the Assyrian language and the history and the legacy that's tied to the language. So we were taught to only speak Assyrian at home because, again, the only way that the language will continue to exist is if it's passed from generation to generation. So at home, we spoke Assyrian. Outside of the home, we spoke Arabic. And prior to the war, we were fortunate enough that, we went to a French school. So we learned French at
That's
school.
right. I noticed that as well. I was like, where did you learn French?
Yeah, so Arabic outside of the home, and then French at school, and of course Arabic, because it is the national language in Lebanon. But French is also a recognized, or Lebanon's considered a French-speaking country because it was a French colony for many years prior to its independence. So, and then when we came here, I learned English.
That is amazing. So you've got a knack for learning languages then.
I did. It's getting harder as you get older.
Yeah. The other question is that you joined the Air Force on your 18th birthday. What was your passion for that got you to do that?
Well, I always was interested in the military and law enforcement. I always wanted a career tied to either military or law enforcement. I always was drawn to adventure and that type of a career. So a recruiter came to the high school, and I started talking to the recruiter, and got me really motivated, or kind of tugged at my desire to want to pursue that kind of career path.
Do you feel when you were growing up, you were all about justice? Like you had an innate sense for doing the right thing and holding a certain standard?
Well, I mean, I definitely say I got my values and character from my parents, especially from my dad. So recognizing the importance of doing the right thing and all of those things. I wouldn't say it was a sense of justice. It was more a sense of adventure, and
Okay.
So that's what it drew me to both military and law enforcement. I wanted a career that was exciting, that was going to be dangerous and adventurous. Of course, I was influenced by TV and cop shows, and it kind of made me want to pursue that type of a career. I definitely knew I didn't want a Monday through Friday 8 to 5 type career, or a business, or sitting behind a desk or anything like that.
Yeah, that sounds so much fun. I mean, just hearing you say that, I'm like, oh, okay, now that makes more sense. Of I'm gonna fly a plane, I'm gonna fly a jet, or any of that.
Exactly.
And then as I was listening to some different stories, there was a bank robbery that made you think, ooh, this is exciting. I want to do more of this kind of work.
Sort of. So I was fortunate. I was promoted to detective, series PD. And my first week as a detective, literally the second day as a detective, the Wells Fargo in series on 3rd Street actually was robbed. So I responded to the bank robbery, and met a very young FBI agent in the course of the investigation. The FBI has jurisdiction to investigate bank robberies because most financial institutions are federally insured. So the FBI has the authority or jurisdiction to investigate bank robberies along with local law enforcement. So I met Todd Aranaga, very young at the time, and we became friends. And I was so impressed by Todd. Todd was the model FBI agent, incredible character, work ethic, dedication. I was just so in awe of Todd, and I thought an organization that attracts or has this quality of a workforce, it made me want to join. So Todd helped recruit me and convince me to, that the FBI was a possibility, or a path that I could pursue. Because when I would tell people I was interested in the FBI, everyone initially told me no way. The FBI isn't going to hire you. You're an immigrant. You're from the Middle East. All of those things. I could have easily been dissuaded. I credit Todd in encouraging me that it was possible through hard work, dedication, to generate a success.
To be a part of that level of in this country, to be accepted, I mean, that must have been a pretty big challenge just in and of itself. So it sounds like Todd gave you access. Todd helped you to believe in yourself that you could do it.
Absolutely. I'm very fortunate for Todd's not only support but friendship and mentorship. So, he told me it was possible, but not guaranteed. It's extremely difficult to get into the FBI, and I recognize that. But if you want to be the best at whatever that you pursue, for me in law enforcement, it was having the opportunity to join the premier agency in the world, which is the FBI.
Yeah, I feel like you're one of those people that has this amazing knack to just lock in. Like when you have your target, you're like, I know what I want. I'm going to go after it.
Yes, I get laser focused, and I'm very determined.
What was that transition like from being a detective to getting into the FBI? Like, how did that all go down?
So immediately after graduating, I remember I got my bachelor's degree in November of 1997. And in December, I applied. I literally immediately
Just
applied.
sent an application.
Yes. So back then, it was actually...
You filled it out.
Fill it out, yeah. It was a written copy. So I filled it out and began the process in January 1998. The process took over a year. And, I was fortunate enough to make it through. And in January of 99, I was informed that I had been accepted into the FBI and that I would be attending the FBI Academy in March of 1999. So I went off to Quantico, to the FBI Academy, where all new agents complete the FBI Basic Academy. At that time, it was about 17 weeks. In the academies where you find out where you will be assigned, and I believe it's around week 6. So I got my orders, and I was stationed in the Phoenix field office. That was my first assignment in the FBI.
And what was your family thinking all this time that you were doing all these things?
It was, it was mixed. As you know, Assyrians, were very family oriented, very close. The idea of me moving away was difficult for my family, but I'm very fortunate. My family was extremely supportive, and were behind me.
And what kind of work were you doing?
So I expected to be assigned to the violent crime program because of my background as a police officer, as a detective working crimes against persons or violent crimes, robberies, those types of things. So I thought I would be a natural fit for violent crime. But someone saw on my FBI training form that I spoke Arabic, and then I was immediately assigned to the counterterrorism team within the Phoenix field
Because
office.
of everything that was going on at that time?
Yes, of course. When you look at late 1990s or 99, 2000, Al Qaeda had emerged as the biggest threat against the United States. It was at that point identified as the most significant terrorist organization committed to attacking the United States. So our counterterrorism mission, its priority was quickly evolving to be, the Bureau's number one priority.
That probably would have been helpful for you, at least in terms of the contribution you're making. You have special insight, you're able to understand the language. And then where did you go from Phoenix?
So after when I was first assigned to Phoenix, 9/11 occurred. So I was assigned to be part of that investigative effort. 2 of the hijackers had been in Phoenix. Hani Hanjour, who piloted American Airlines Flight 77, which crashed into the Pentagon, had actually trained and lived for a period of time in Phoenix. So we had a significant aspect of that investigation. So I was involved in that investigation, had the opportunity to be part of that overall FBI effort. And then shortly after that, at the time, Director Mueller recognized the need to create an elite counterterrorism rapid deployment team that could go anywhere around the world to address counterterrorism threats against the United States, both domestically as well as internationally. It was a new team that was going to be based out of the counterterrorism division in Washington, D.C. In I believe it was March of 2003, I moved to Washington, D.C. to be part of the fly team, as it was called.
Were you going after more adventure?
I was going after a lot more adventure.
Hey,
yes.
I'm going to sign up for the team that might get sent anywhere in the world at any
my
time.
first assignment was to Iraq. So I literally reported to the team in March of 2003, and as soon as I landed on the team, I was dispatched to Iraq to be part of the first FBI team to deploy to the war zone.
What was your first mission there?
So there was a small FBI element. When we were sent there to support FBI priorities or missions, as well as to support the U.S. military in its effort to, at that time, locate high-value targets. Basically, the folks that were on the deck of cards that came out prior to the war, as well as develop any intelligence on any threats against U.S. forces or the United States and its interests.
And one thing that I've been really wanting to know is, how were you able to, as an Assyrian, the indigenous people of Iraq, what was it like for you? Were you compartmentalizing? Yes, I have my Assyrian heritage and my Assyrian background, who, at one point the Assyrians ruled that whole area, and now you're there sort of from another country, going to solve a pretty challenging problem. How did you process this?
I'll be honest, it was such a chaotic time. You really didn't have time to think about those kinds of things. The conditions were so difficult. From the moment you got up till the moment you went to bed, you're working. I found it, of course, extremely helpful being able to speak Arabic. There was a significant shortage of Arabic speakers, whether it was the Bureau, the CIA, or the military. So I was being called upon to not only support the FBI mission, but the CIA mission. The military would utilize me, and so it was so busy, you didn't have time to kind of, think. I ran into a lot of Assyrians, and the Assyrians were amazing and wonderful. And as soon as I would see an Assyrian, I would, of course, immediately identify myself as an Assyrian, and I could see the not only the support, but the love and the pride. So that was very, very visible. But on the other sense, when I would be operational, I speak Arabic with a heavy Lebanese accent, so occasionally the Iraqis would be questioning why the Lebanese army was supporting the U.S. military, and I'd be like, no, I'm actually American. I just happen to speak a Lebanese version of Arabic.
That's one of the things we've seen on the Assyrian podcast is Assyrian people. We know how to connect with people from all different backgrounds, all different walks. And that's just something so beautiful about who we are.
Oh, absolutely. I tell folks when I meet an Assyrian, even though that's the first time I'm meeting them, within a couple of minutes, it's like we've known each other for forever. Because in reality, at some point, we're all related, and we all come from the same cloth. You can't break that connection and that tie.
Were you able to stop at any of those Assyrian villages and get some Assyrian food or anything like that, or no chance to do anything like that?
So early on, it was actually really cool because the insurgency was not emerged yet. So while there were still a lot of security concerns, immediately after the fighting had ended, we were able to go into some of the neighborhoods, and I would go to a lot of the shops that were either run or owned by Assyrians and purchase things, because again, there was no food. So if we wanted fresh bread or fresh food, we would have to go into the city, soda, and of course I would seek out Assyrian stores and things like that, one because of trust and confidence and safety, and then the other main reason, I wanted to connect with Assyrians. And
that is very cool. So I think at some point you ended up back in Florida.
So I went to Florida. That was way later,
okay.
Right? So so after my first tour in Iraq, I came back to the team, and then went on a couple of other assignments, and then of course Saddam Hussein was captured in December of 2003. CIA asked the FBI to take the lead, and then shortly after, the FBI identified me or selected me to lead the interrogation of Saddam Hussein. Deployed to Iraq in January of 2004, and I was there until August of 2004. Returned back to the team in September. I was asked if I could help the Iraqis in building the criminal case against Saddam Hussein for his prosecution. As you can imagine, at that point, the Iraqis didn't have the infrastructure or the capability to build such a complex, difficult prosecutive report or investigation against someone as significant as Saddam. So the FBI agreed to assist the Iraqis. So I led that effort, and that took probably another 5 or 6 months. And then after that, I actually went off to Afghanistan for that next adventure.
Jeez.
And did a tour in Afghanistan. And then upon my return, I got promoted to supervisor, and then I ran the Joint Terrorism Task Force in the Washington field office, where my team was responsible for protecting the national capital from international terrorists. So did that for a number of years, and then was promoted again to Assistant Special Agent in Charge over the Counterterrorism Branch for the Washington, D.C. area. And then, kept getting promoted to eventually having the privilege of being the Special Agent in Charge, which is the head of the Miami field office.
That's right.
So that was in February of 2014. And, extremely wonderful assignment, very challenging, because you can imagine, extremely busy. It's Miami. But not only did we cover Miami or South Florida, that entire region, but we also covered the Caribbean, Central and South America. All of that was worked out of my office.
So you were the lead interrogator for Saddam,
For the FBI, yes.
for FBI with that specific person.
Yes.
And when you got that call, were you like, great, a new adventure, or were you scared, or did you call your family? Tell us like what happened.
So, as you can imagine, I was terrified when I got the call. Anybody tells you that they wouldn't be, they're lying, right? One, because I understood the magnitude of what was being asked and the importance of what was being asked. Again, having already been to Iraq, I understood the impact that the interrogation would have and the importance, and not only from my perspective, but really from the FBI's perspective. Because one of the things that we learn in the FBI is that what we do belongs to the FBI. It doesn't really belong to the individual. So it's always about the FBI and the FBI reputation and legacy. So I knew what was at stake, and of course, that was terrifying initially. All of that kind of goes away, and you start focusing on the task at hand and things like that, and very quickly, those concerns or fears, disappear, and you start getting into the actual work and get very, very focused.
What an amazing high honor of everyone in the country. They chose you. They called you and said, hey, we want this guy to be the one who's going to go do this.
Yes and no. So I'll be, I'm very honest about that. So, one of the things that the FBI recognized, for the interrogator to have any chance of success, the interrogator had to be able to speak Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
Saddam didn't speak English. Saddam only spoke Arabic. And this was going to be a long-term interrogation. So really, for the interrogator to have any chance of success, the interrogator had to be able to speak directly with Saddam. So, when you think about, or when the Bureau was looking through its agent population, looking for Arabic speakers, at that time we had 12,000 FBI special agents posted around the world. When you start looking at how many of those really speak Arabic, and as you can appreciate, there's a distinction between native speaker and non-native speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And for this assignment, they were looking for a native speaker because that was going to be much more valuable and beneficial. So when you talk about native speakers at that time, I think we had about a dozen.
Yeah.
So, I wasn't really picked in comparison to the 12,000, that pool of possible candidates quickly.
Yeah, not to mention you were on that special group that was going around, the counterterrorism group, and you had all this experience.
Yes, but I was very young at the time. I had less than 5 years in the FBI when I was selected. So
that's what I was thinking, because you mentioned 1999 is when you start, and then 2004 you're in Iraq doing probably the hardest job there is, right, at that time.
At that time, yes.
That is just wild. So one of the things that's fascinating as we dive into this part of your life of taking those 6 months or 8 months, how long exactly were you with?
So I was in country nearly 8 months. I was with him roughly 7.
And as we dive into that, it's sort of you don't sit down with too many people who you can say they got to know a dictator really, really well. So what's that been like for you as you interact with folks and say, yeah, I sat down and got to know this person really well?
So, when you look at it from the interrogation perspective, for me at that time, it was really focused on, what our priorities were, and then developing a successful plan to help achieve, those priorities or goals. So very goal driven, very focused plan that was designed around developing the rapport that was necessary, and then over time gaining his trust and confidence, and then wearing down his defense, and then getting him to cooperate and provide truthful information. People ask me, what was that experience like? Again, from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to sleep, I worked every single day, no days off. And the days easily were 16 plus hours. So when you think about it like that, you don't really, at that time, I didn't, have the opportunity to stop and think about, what an awesome experience. I'm interrogating Saddam Hussein. You're so in the midst of it, you don't really have that not only that opportunity or even interested in kind of thinking like that. You're so focused and and you get worn down because of the pace and things like that. Now having the opportunity to reflect back, when you look at Saddam, he, of course, one of the most brutal dictators of our modern time. But you're absolutely right. Very few in history have had the opportunity to sit down with someone like Saddam and be able to not only understand, the decision-making process that led to, three major wars and cost thousands of lives, but also, the individual and what made him, what he valued in life, those kinds of things that very few people would ever have the opportunity.
Yeah, and I know I want to talk about this a little later, but I know you went to Georgetown and you got your master's degree in Arab Studies, International Security Studies. This was after that, and as I was looking at that, I was like, I wonder if he taught the courses and read the book or wrote the books, because
I wish. No, that was one of my goals, personal goals. I always wanted to go to Georgetown. And, when you talk about immigrating here, and only in the United States does someone like me have the opportunity to go to one of the most prestigious universities in the country, and those kinds of things. And it's an illustration of the values that my parents instilled in me. And for me, that was more about a personal goal than professional advancement.
Congrats, that's a big deal in and of itself. And going back to getting to know Saddam Hussein and spending time with him, in the Turlock Journal, March 2015, you were quoted as saying, "I spent a month and a half just building rapport with Saddam Hussein, who spoke to the dictator 5 to 7 hours every day for 7 months straight without a single day off." So how did you build rapport with him?
I build rapport by finding things that the person interrogating or interviewing has no reason to lie to me about, and would be willing to talk about openly and honestly. So that requires a little bit of research. The better you know the person you're interviewing, as I can see from the notes that you have and the research that you've done, the better the interview is going to be. It's the same principle. So, when I was spending that month and a half, I talked about things that I knew he was going to be comfortable talking about, things that he would be willing to talk about, in a sense would be very confident about talking, or wanting to share because there were successes, or things like that. So that's what I did for that first month and a half. And because what we wanted to know from Saddam, its value didn't diminish whether we got it on day 1 or day 365. It was just getting it. With Saddam, what we wanted to know was in his head, and its importance. We were able to take our time. So I spent a month and a half talking about things that I knew he would enjoy talking about.
Could you share examples?
So, for example, the first topic of discussion was a book that he wrote called Zabiba and the King. Most people don't know Saddam was an author. He published 4 books in Iraq, and as I understand, they were all bestsellers in Iraq.
Yeah, well.
So the first topic was his first published book called Zabiba and the King. Again, as you think about it, who would not be proud of their first published piece, and things like that? So I purposely picked that and I read it, so I was able to talk about not only the book, but the characters, the meaning behind the characters, and things like that. I remember another discussion. In the 70s, Iraq was extremely successful and was a model for other countries. For example, it had received awards or recognition from the United Nations for its healthcare program, its educational program, and things like that. So we talked about, and some of those, if not all of them, were as a result of his leadership and his effort to modernize and develop Iraq, from nationalizing its oil production to developing its highways and things like that. So we talked about all of those things, and of course talked about the history of Iraq, which is the cradle of civilization. Some of the most important advancements in modern time have come out of Iraq, and so who would not be proud of that? And then again, at some point, I told him I was Assyrian, so for him, he really connected with that because he tied Assyrians to Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
And so for him it was it kind of, as soon as I introduced myself and I used my real name, he knew I was Christian, right?
Oh, that's right. And tell me why that was important for him or helpful for him.
Because he told me, because Christians, I wouldn't have the bias that the others had, right? So if I was Shiite, of course, he feared the resentment that the Shiite population in Iraq had against him. Sunnis, he was concerned that they would not be loyal. With a Christian, I was kind of neutral, and Lebanese background or descent kind of again made me neutral. He didn't really care for anyone from the Gulf countries. He looked down at anyone from Egypt and Palestine, and because they used to be the workforce in Iraq. So I just by accident happened to have the perfect background, Christian, of Lebanese descent, so very neutral. I wouldn't have lost anyone to his government. I wouldn't have any bias toward him and any of those kinds of things. So it was perfect.
That's pretty amazing. So can you share a little more of like what was the room or the conditions like?
Yes. So initially the room was purposely designed to create a stressor. And what I mean by that is when you're building rapport, you don't want your subject to get too comfortable. So there has to be some stressors to create that off balance feeling or a little bit of anxiety. So the room was designed to create that, because the questions or the topic of discussions were not, because they were things to help connect and build that rapport. And so initially the room was what you would picture an interrogation room would be like, right? The walls were painted white. It was cold. The AC was on. There was no furniture. Several steel chairs with no padding, no armrests. The room was designed to kind of help create the environment that we were looking for. We would change the design of the room depending on the progression of the interrogation. So the room played a part of that. And it goes into the whole strategy. So, but initially,
very interesting.
Yeah, initially the room was what you would expect, right? White walls, the chair. You walk in there and you realize you're going to get interrogated. You wanted to kind of create that environment, but then you sit down and you're talking about Zabiba and the king, or the history of Iraq, Hammurabi, Sargon, those kinds of things, and it kind of creates that. That off balance perspective.
So you had mentioned in some interviews that he was very charismatic.
He could be very charismatic. He could be very charming. He had an incredible sense of humor. He could be polite, very intelligent, but also he could get very, very angry too.
Did he ever get upset with you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Can you share more of what that was?
Well, I can tell you the first time I made him upset is I called him the former president of Iraq, and he got really angry, and then I made a note to myself, don't use titles after that. So that was the first time I think he got really, really, really angry. Other times I recognized, some of the things that weren't working. So that a lot of times you want to do comparisons, right? And what I mean by that, you want to show someone's their shortcomings or their failures, and you do that by comparing them to other very successful or historical leaders, right? So when you think about the Middle East and you talk about the Arab culture, the first or the most prominent person that comes to mind is Gamal Abdel Nasser, the founder of the Pan-Arab movement, the leader of Egypt. He hated him, and he didn't think he was all that worthy, and so that comparison failed miserably. And then that's what kind of made me recognize and evolve I remember sitting there in one of his palaces, and everywhere you go, and it was engraved into the wall or etched into the wall, there was Hammurabi, Sargon, Nebuchadnezzar, and Salahuddin.
Mm-hmm.
So those were the four that he revered or valued, and then the comparisons became him against them versus modern day leaders, because in his mind there weren't any modern day leaders that were worthy of comparison to him.
It's so I that's one of the biggest eye openers as I've been researching a lot of this. Is it's sort of like it's sort of like LeBron James saying there's no one in the last 20 years or who's playing now that even is on my level, so I'm comparing myself to like the very first
to
players.
Like Bill Russell, who's got
Right.
11 rings, and those, again, with every generation, there's a different mindset and different kind of standards. So for him, there was nobody on his level in modern times, which in a sense it helped us, because when you talk about Salahuddin or Hammurabi or Nebuchadnezzar, those comparisons worked in our favor.
Yeah, so you're leveraging all of this data to try to gain more insight into who he is, what he's thinking, or what his next moves may have been,
and to kind of get him to understand and accept reality and his fate.
Was there in his mind a chance that he would just return to where he was, or that this was just a temporary
Probably at the
thing?
beginning he thought there was, but of course as time went, that we made it very clear that there was no coming back from this.
Well, I've got some crowdsourced questions.
Okay.
So they're sort of along the same lines here. So you already kind of answered a few of them. One of the questions is how did Saddam or people close to him justify his actions?
They didn't justify his actions. They blamed him for everything, which is not surprising, right? So after their capture, so for example, my team and I, we interviewed Tariq Aziz, Taha Yassin Ramadan, who was the vice president of Iraq, Ali Hassan al-Majid, better known as Chemical Ali, so the senior leaders, or the a significant number of the Revolutionary Command Council, but they all were very quick to put blame on Saddam, minimize their role, and what he told me about them is that of course he didn't trust them fully and didn't rely on them in an intellectual sense. He needed them and needed their loyalty, not their talents. He openly admitted he didn't select people based on talent. He selected based on loyalty.
Mm-hmm. So even though if you would have brought up to him, or if you did brought up to him like some of the things that he had done that had been pretty evil, there was no remorse, or there was no sort of this is why I did that, or
oh no, there was. So there was no remorse or regret, but there wasn't. I wouldn't say he tried to justify it, but he did say, for example, he owned his decisions, and he said or admitted to why he did some of those things. For example, when we talk about the gassing of the Kurds, in his mind, the Kurds were committing treason because they were helping Iranian forces sneak into Iraqi territory through the Kurdish passes. So they were helping a declared enemy of Iraq who was in a declared war. So he looked at me, he's like, in the United States, treason is punishable by what? And in theory, in the United States, treason is punishable by death, but there's a legal process with
Right.
due rights and due process and all those kinds of things, right? So that's how he justified some of that. It was necessary. That's the word
he felt it was the right thing for him to do within his leadership.
Absolutely. And then he told me how difficult it is to be a leader, but a leader has to make those difficult or decisive decisions. It was necessary. During the 91 uprising, they were committing treason again, and as a result, he had to put the revolt down.
Yeah. That's one of the other pieces, is obviously 20 years have passed. So now you have people with all kinds of narratives about who he was and what he did. And that's something that I'm wondering, did your opinion of him change, and has it changed 20 years later?
So my opinion of him hasn't changed, and what I mean by that is, in a sense, the horrific atrocities that he was responsible for, the impact of those atrocities hasn't really diminished. Right? When you think about the gassing and the three major wars and all of the lives lost and everything like that. So in that sense, no. Now that I'm retired and I am entitled to have my own opinion, and I do wonder, looking back, is Iraq better since we removed Saddam Hussein? That's a very difficult question. I think it would be very hard to find a lot of people who say, and again, I'm not questioning the decision to remove Saddam. There were a lot of legitimate reasons, but can you look now and say, is Iraq better 20 years later without Saddam Hussein? And I think it would be very hard for people to say yes.
And that's kind of one of the questions that I was a little nervous to ask you about, because as an Assyrian and what's happened to Assyrian people over the last 20 years in Iraq, like, there's significantly less Assyrian people there now.
Absolutely. Again, unfortunately, Assyrians have been the victims, in that part of the world for centuries. But the Assyrians suffered significantly under ISIS. When ISIS took control of parts of Iraq, of course, they immediately focused on the Assyrians because of our religion and our belief, and a lot of Assyrians were forced to flee their homes and the country, exiled and all over the world. So the Assyrians have suffered significantly.
I wonder to myself, when I think about your role and all of that, and just the weight of having to interview this person and interrogate him, and then seeing all that happen, do you wish you would have done anything differently?
No. Not from an operational perspective. Absolutely not. Again, as I mentioned, when I was in the midst of the interrogation, you really don't have time to think about anything else. You're so focused. There's so much going on that between interviewing him and the others, the research, the report writing, the updates, all of that, it was an exhaustive period, and so you didn't really have a lot of time to sit there and contemplate things. So for me, looking back, I was very cautious, of course, because of the significance and the importance. I could have probably been a little more aggressive, but in reality, I don't think I would have changed anything.
So going back to your mission there and understanding the ties with Al Qaeda, is that one of those things that you can't share more about?
So a significant portion of the interrogation was declassified, but not all of it.
Okay.
There's a couple of aspects of it that remain classified that, of course, I can't talk about. I can give you a broad overview of, the relationship between Iraq and Al Qaeda, but I can't give you the specifics.
Well, I'm glad we hit that milestone in the podcast. I wanted to ask a few more questions around this and then dig in a little bit about your book, and I've got some other fun stories. So,
okay.
I mean, you did such a good job of actually getting to know him. I know you went with him to the hospital.
Absolutely.
And that was just you and him and a...
Yep. I took him to the hospital. I took him to court. I dealt with his medical issues. I dealt with his fear of flying. All of those kinds of things that no one has ever had experience with him, and all of those that you really can't summarize or put a value to.
Can you tell us about the white horse story?
The white horse story. So the white horse story is more of kind of a joke or a way to break up the presentation. So prior to the war, it was Iraqi law that every Iraqi office, government building, home had a picture of Saddam Hussein, and then of course on every street corner there was a bulletin board or one of those huge signs that would have pictures of Saddam. his favorite photo of himself was him in a uniform riding a white horse. And, when I give my keynote addresses to help inspire, the next generation of leaders or FBI folks or things like that, or to promote the FBI. So I talk about that particular picture because that was his favorite photo, because it depicts him in the way he wanted people to remember him. He was in uniform, so saying that he was a warrior. He had a sword that was very visible, because in his mind he was the third greatest warrior in Arab Muslim history, third to only the Prophet Muhammad, Salahuddin, who recaptured Jerusalem, and then it's Saddam Hussein, and then he's riding a white horse. And when you think about it from a fairy tale perspective, or that who rides a white horse, it's the hero. So I have the opposite. I'm riding a white donkey, and I do that comparison between how he saw things and how I saw things.
Yeah, that was one I got a real good chuckle out of. And then I know you gave him some of your mom's cookies.
Absolutely. So I didn't ship them. She shipped them.
Right.
So my parents at the time had no idea what I was doing. So I wasn't allowed to tell anyone what I was doing. My parents knew I was in Iraq for my second tour of 3. And as you can imagine, my parents were not very excited. I made a big mistake. When I came back from my first tour in Iraq, I was talking to my dad, and I told him too many stories about some of the cool things that I was doing in Iraq, and some of the dangerous situations that I was involved in, and some of those kinds of things. So it scared my mom, of course, being a typical Assyrian mom. So when I went back to Iraq, she thought I was going to be in those kinds of situations again, and so they were not thrilled about it. So I asked her to send me a care package, and it was my mom who FedExed them from Turlock all the way to to Baghdad, and and then sent them. And I wanted them for his birthday, because I talked about my mom a lot, because when I studied Saddam, the only person that Saddam truly cared for, and the only person that cared for Saddam and had any influence, was his mom. He didn't know his father. Saddam didn't have a father, so his mom was really, really important. And then you add the cultural importance. The most important woman in an Arab man or an Assyrian man's life is
the mom.
Always will be the mom.
Yeah.
So and so we talked about that. So sharing my mom's cookies was another step in kind of cementing that that connection.
And as you were sharing all that, now I want to know, when you get home and you tell your parents or you tell your family, like, first of all, you told no one.
No.
You couldn't tell like any human being, hey, I'm going to interrogate Saddam Hussein.
No.
So then when was the first chance you were able to share?
So when I came back, I came to visit my parents. I was at my parents' house. I remember very clearly, because I arrived at like a late afternoon or evening. And so the next morning we're sitting in the kitchen. My dad and I were having coffee at the kitchen table, and we were talking, and I was telling him about some of the things. My mom's in the kitchen. I remember she was at the stove, and then I remembered sharing her cookies with him, and I look over and I tell her, I gave him your cookies and all that, and she hit me.
Wow.
Of course, in a loving, kind of
a,
funny gesture, but yeah, that was her initial reaction.
But they were just shocked. They were.
Absolutely.
And do you guys talk about it a lot? I'm sure they've had 6-hour interviews with you,
right?
I
mean, they, at this point, we don't, talk about it that much anymore. But, at the time, they were, of course, very proud and very supportive. But over time, it kind of,
it's old news at this point. It's old news
at this point. Yes.
Well, it's still amazing news, and it's still interesting. The only other question around Saddam Hussein is, did he share anything with you that was helpful? Like, were you able to get from him the data you needed?
Absolutely. He told us what we were truly looking for, both as it pertained to WMD and to the extent or the true nature of the relationship between Iraq and Al-Qaeda.
And did you find the WMD? There wasn't any, and what was that like?
So it became evident that Iraq didn't have the WMD that we suspected. So our direction was, okay, find out why we were wrong about Iraq's WMD and what were Saddam's long-term intentions.
Okay.
And that's what we focused on.
Yeah.
Most people didn't really understand and appreciate Saddam feared Iran, his next door neighbor. It wasn't the United States, or it wasn't even Israel. It was Iran. He fought an 8-year war, in a war that he almost lost, and it wasn't for his far more developed weapons capability in WMD, he would have absolutely lost that war. In 1987, that was called the War of the Cities, and that's where he was able to strike deep into Tehran and bring Iran to its knees and force Ayatollah Khomeini to the negotiating table. In his mind, if Iran became aware of how weak and vulnerable he had become, nothing would have stopped it from reinvading and taking the two holy Shiite places. So he bluffed his biggest enemy into believing he still was as dangerous as he had been in the late 80s. And that was his plan and intent. At the same time, it was, he made a significant effort to lift sanctions. So we really understood how he manipulated and misled not only his subordinates but the rest of the world to achieve his goal. A risk taker, but when you're a brutal dictator, there are no checks and balances. And
yeah, he had to intimidate people. He had to use that. So thanks for all of that. Now we want a more challenging topic. Jiu-jitsu. And
yes.
You're retired now. When did you retire?
So I retired exactly a year ago.
1 year you've been retired.
Yes.
Wow. So what's that been like for you?
It's been amazing. Of course, not including my military service. When I retired, I had nearly 34 years of law enforcement experience or service. So
you're just a civilian now.
I'm a civilian now, sort of, yes. But so for me, I'd achieved everything I ever wanted to and more in my law enforcement career, and I felt it was time for me to to not only retire but to pursue other the other opportunities or passions, including the writing of a book. And this is the 20-year anniversary of the Iraq War, and I kind of recognize the importance of releasing the book and taking advantage of the anniversary and the focus on Iraq and Saddam, for the release of the book, and I'm hoping the timing does work out. Plus, as you mentioned, I had a second career and a second passion, and I wanted to take a couple of years and really devote myself and really commit myself full-time, laser focused on that, and see how far I could take it and how good I can get and things like that. So I retired, and now I spend the majority of my retirement as a full-time professional BJJ fighter with American Top Team, which is the team that I train under and belong to in South Florida, and getting ready for the next level of adventure.
You were a champion, right? Like a gi world champion?
Yes, I won the World No Gi Championship last December, and training to defend it this year at the end of the year.
Are you a black belt?
I'm a brown belt.
Brown belt. Okay.
Yes.
When's your next match?
So I'm in the midst of training now. The one thing with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, injuries are common. So I'm recovering from a recent injury. I anticipate my next tournament or fight will be either August or September.
Okay, so
yeah.
Coming up.
What
do you think of Beneil Dariush?
Oh my God, I'm a huge Benny fan. Right, of course, I'm extremely proud of the fact that we have an Assyrian at that level. He is one of the elite fighters, and I've actually tried to meet Beneil and hope at one point I'll have the opportunity to meet him.
He's been so accessible to the Assyrian community. I actually got to interview him as well, and honestly, you two have same demeanor in many ways. You're very direct and think through your thoughts really well. So I don't think you'd have too much trouble really connecting with him. But Yeah, that is so cool. I just figured you would be a big fan because
I'm
of
a huge fan. There are a lot of things that I really respect and admire about Benil. His work ethic, his training, his faith, his commitment to family, our culture, our history, all of those things. And again, it really does make me proud to see an Assyrian so accomplished, especially in that arena, in that field.
Yeah, well, it sounds like this last year for you has been an amazing adventure. So that theme runs throughout your life. Tell me when your book is coming out.
So hopefully the book is gonna come out December of this year.
Okay.
And the goal is to try to time it with the capture of Saddam Hussein. So December of this year will be 20-year anniversary of his capture, and kind of want to leverage that.
I can't
that.
wait to read that.
Thank you.
Have you been working on that for a while?
Started working on it again when I retired. The book proposal was approved by the FBI, and I'm working with an incredible writer who's actually helping me write, and hopefully signed with Simon & Schuster. That's the publishing company out of New York.
They're
and
huge.
Hopefully, yes. Yeah. So hopefully it'll be out at the end of the year.
Oh my gosh. And then will there be an audiobook version?
Oh, absolutely.
You gotta have it. And are you going to be be the reader for the audio? I hope you are. I hope you are.
We'll see. And then, my goal at that point is, as I've promised my mom, is to have a book release, book signing here in Turlock.
Absolutely. And I will be there.
For our Assyrian community.
Yeah, the Assyrian community, we love stories like this, and we loved it. All my life, I've heard so many stories of Assyrians who have been in very unique positions. And when I think that of everyone on the planet, you were the one chosen to do that job. And it's just, it's a testament to, I think, who Assyrians are, and then who you are, and all of your hard work and dedication.
Well, thank you. But, as my parents, especially my dad, has instilled in us, the importance of our history, culture, tradition. We can't overlook that, and what we represent, where we've come from, and where we're going. It is imperative that we take pride in that and continue to promote our not only our history, but what our potential is and what our capabilities are as a community and as people.
And this question, if we want to talk about it off air, is cool. Sure. But do you think there's any hope for Assyrians in Iraq of establishing themselves to have their own place there?
I hold out hope for that. My issue and frustration and anger is that I wish we would be more united. There's it's okay to disagree and everything like that internally, but externally we should be very united. We should be extremely protective and look at what's in the entire Assyrian population's best interest instead of individual groups or individuals themselves. And until we reach that point, we're never going to be accomplished the way we should be until we get that.
So the greatest mission facing Assyrians is unity.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're even here in Turlock or in other
anywhere. We don't support each other the way we should.
We're too divided.
Yeah.
And as a result, that serves our enemy.
Yep.
Because they take advantage of our division.
Well, last question. It's a question we ask everyone who's on the Assyrian podcast is, if you can say one thing to all the Assyrians all around the world that are listening to the podcast, what would you like to say to them?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One, never forget who you are, right? Being an Assyrian is a blessing. When you look at our history, where we come from, what we represent, the strength and honor that our ancestors have accomplished, that should never be forgotten, dismissed, should be not only appreciated, but promoted. The second thing I would say, the only person that can stop you from accomplishing your goals is yourself. There will be challenges, there will be hurdles, there will be difficulties, but at the end of the day, the only one that can dictate who you are and what you accomplish in life is you. If you set your mind to it and you work hard, you can accomplish it. And I tell everybody wants to be a champion, but not everybody's willing to do what it takes to be a champion. And at the end of the day, only you can dictate that.
Hey, it's been such a pleasure and blast to have you on the Assyrian podcast. Thank you so much. I have 5 hours more worth of questions, but I know we have company. No, thank you so much, George.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Assyrian podcast. We'd love for you to share this episode with friends or family who you think would find it interesting. We'd also love for you to share with us any recommendations of people you think we should interview, or if you would like to host an episode, we'd love for you to reach out. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.